My name's Ken Aaron, and you're watching Open Agenda. Things have been so crazy in the news now, it's exceeding Alice in Wonderland through the looking glass, and it's even gone beyond some of my favorite Monty Python movies. And it really hardly matters when you're watching this show, the statement will hold true. So what we're going to do today is look at some of the fundamental events that have happened in our recent American history, which in certain ways presaged or set us up for the instability and the chaos and the authoritarian colonial empire that seems to be impressing itself all across the country, demanding our blind obedience and dedicated patriotic conformity to the cause. And we're going to look back at some events that have happened in our history that everybody knows about but doesn't really know everything about. And I'm pleased to announce that my guest tonight is James DiEugenio. He's an author. He's written a book called The Assassins. And tonight we're going to be discussing the assassination of Robert Kennedy. And I think it's RFK. Jim, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Ken.
Hey, I think I got you stumped with a question. What's the F stand for? Do you know?
I think it's Francis.
Oh, okay. Robert Francis Kennedy. Okay.
Right.
All right. So in talking about this thing with Robert, or RFK, Robert Francis Kennedy, he was the Attorney General underneath John Fitzgerald Kennedy. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was in office from
61 to 63.
61 to 63. And he immediately assigned, or fairly soon, he got his brother approved as the Attorney General.
Mm-hmm.
And then RFK had a stellar career going after the mob, right?
Right.
He had a big confrontation with James Hoffa.
Right.
And other...
Hoffa and various other gangsters.
Gangsters.
Like Sam Giancana and Trafficante, et cetera. And
Trafficante.
Marcello, yeah, right.
The mob, huh?
Right. Yeah.
And what else is he noted for in his career as an Attorney General?
RFK's career as the Attorney General is, well, number one, of course, is his campaign against organized crime. Okay, but he was also going after, corporate monopolies. Okay, and for instance, there's a the steel case is a really incredible case.
That's right.
Where RFK got together with all the steel magnates, okay, and JFK is very worried about this increase in steel prices, okay, so he basically makes a deal with these steel companies, okay, that they will not raise prices. In return, he will go to the unions and ask them not to demand wage increases, because what he wanted to do is stave off an inflationary cycle, okay, in the economy. So he basically has this deal with them, okay? All right, well, I think it's 48 hours later, they break the deal, okay? And they announce a steel hike. And so it's almost an...
But the players are this Bethlehem Steel,
right,
U.S. Steel.
U.S. Steel is the biggest one, the Morgan Company, okay? And so basically what happens is RFK and JFK are sitting in the Oval Office, and RFK goes, well, are we going to take this screwing laying down? Okay. And JFK goes, well, what do you think we can do? He goes, well, I can do a lot of stuff. I can file an anti-monopoly suit tomorrow. He goes, really? He goes, yeah. Well, let's do it then. Okay, so RFK announces he's going to file this anti-monopoly suit for conspiracy charges, to raise these prices. And then JFK goes on national television, makes a... you've got to read this speech, by the way. It's hard to believe that an American president in the last 50 years made a speech like this. He goes on national television and he basically calls these people a bunch of profit-seeking thieves, okay, who will do anything to strip the middle class of any money that they have. Okay, he sounds like a really full-throated populist, in this speech. And so 1 week later, the steel companies capitulated. Okay. And they said, okay, we'll go back to the old deal.
Sounds like Chavez or Lula.
Right, it does. It really does, yeah.
That's amazing. So that was like in 61? Right?
62.
62?
The 62 steel crisis. Yeah.
So RFK was intimately involved with that.
Oh, yeah.
That bluff.
Yeah, right. He had filed, I think, 4 different lawsuits in 1 week.
I'm just before we go on, there was a key personality associated with the steel people. Do you remember the names of the... Wasn't there a famous guy with the steel industry at that time? Name doesn't come to mind?
No, not right now.
Okay, but it was Bethlehem, U.S. Steel.
Yeah, there were the 5 largest steel companies who got together in a cartel. Okay, and Kennedy was basically going to go after all of them. But then when he filed the lawsuit, Bethlehem was the first one to fall out. They decided to settle, and then once they fell, the other ones, well, there's no point in in trying to keep the cartel together. And so when they collapsed, the other four decided to capitulate also.
Geez, those days are gone. Now that we have corporate presidents.
Well, you're not kidding, yeah.
Okay, so then was it after that he started going after Hoffa and the unions?
Yeah, right. And so then he tried to go after the corruption in the Teamsters Union, okay, which was led by Jimmy Hoffa at that time. All right, and this got to be, of course, a real, as they say, a real blood feud between RFK and Hoffa. Some people think it's RFK's crowning. I kind of tend to think it really wasn't, because I think in that particular case, I think Bobby did get personally involved. Instead of like just going on the straight and narrow, the legal points, etc. I think he basically bent a lot of rules to get Hoffa, because he was so obsessed. See, because this is what happened. Once RFK went after the steel companies, the Republicans said, "Okay, so you just want to go after big business, huh?" So he had to basically do something.
Showed he was even-handed.
Yeah, right. And so he went after labor, okay? And he of course, it's in retrospect that was the guy to go after. If you're going to go after labor, that's the guy to go after, because Hoffa did have some pretty clear ties to organized crime, and he had done some pretty, let's say, off-the-cuff stuff, okay, with the union, like lending money out of the pension fund to the gangsters to erect these hotels, with no interest, in Vegas, etc. Yeah. So and he got caught up in that, but the thing is, Hoffa was such an elusive target, and he had such great attorneys like Edward Bennett Williams, okay, that the thing, what Bobby thought was going to be an easy victory was not. Okay, so this thing really got really bitter and personal.
Okay, so we're looking at a bit of the background of RFK, because we're all going to move over, but I wanted to form a little reality on the person. Mm-hmm. So now in the Bay of Pigs event that occurred in '63?
No, '61.
'61. Was RFK involved in that?
Well, this is what happened in the Bay of Pigs. What happened was that RFK was involved in the investigation afterwards, to a very strong degree, because JFK strongly suspected that the CIA had basically deceived him. And so after this, he doesn't trust these guys from the CIA, and he has Bobby conduct a secret investigation that was not declassified, if you can believe this, until the 90s, okay, as to what really happened at the Bay of Pigs. It's called the Taylor Report, all right? And so Bobby was his representative at those hearings, okay, those secret hearings.
Secret?
Yeah, the Taylor Report.
It's not part of the Senate or the House or anything?
No, it was an executive branch investigation.
Yeah, but I mean, was it open? Did the CIA know they were being investigated?
Oh, yeah. Dulles was part of it, okay? All right, it was basically, if I remember correctly, Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA, who's, by the way, the investigation would end up with his firing, okay? Maxwell Taylor.
Would the investigation led up with the firing of Dulles?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Maxwell Taylor, okay, who was going to be Kennedy's new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Arleigh Burke, the commander-in-chief of the Navy, and Bobby Kennedy were the four people involved. And this went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. Okay.
Well, these two brothers could have written a book. How to make enemies and antagonize people.
Right.
I mean, you got the CIA,
the
Navy, the union, the corporation.
Right. Yeah.
They're just going after, and Cuba, and just there's various factions that people are starting to get gritty about them, I assume.
So the net result of this is that JFK decided that the CIA had deceived him, okay, in the planning of the operation. They never actually themselves believed that the Cuban brigade that they sent on board would succeed. That they felt that once JFK saw that it was going to fail, that he would call in the Navy and let the American military take it over.
So they gave him an overestimated.
Right.
They gave him an estimate that the Cuban...
Yeah.
Okay.
So the Cubans would be able to establish a beachhead, that they would get defectors coming in from there. None of this happened. Okay. And so JFK decided they knew it wouldn't happen. And so that they decided that he would cave and go ahead and send in the American military. Okay, once the results of this investigation are in, JFK decides he can't trust the CIA anymore, and he basically has Bobby okay, be the clearinghouse for any operations the CIA wants to do. Now, the CIA hates Bobby because Bobby really makes them show him everything. 'Cause and I'm not kidding about this, he would demand that the CIA, if they're going to launch a secret operation against Cuba or something with some Cuban commandos, he would want the size of the boat, the number of people in the boat, the gradation of the sand as they landed on the beach, okay? How many weapons they had and the ammunition they were going to use, okay? And so, of course, nobody had ever done this as CIA before. Eisenhower basically said, okay, do whatever you can, come back to me later, all right? But he was really making sure that they were not going to be out of control anymore.
Do you think he was doing it to like monitor them, to discipline them, or to piss them off, or what?
No, I think
he wanted to know.
The Kennedys, after the Bay of Pigs, literally did not trust the Central Intelligence Agency.
So they're going to micromanage anything
Right.
they do.
Okay.
And how was he with the FBI?
And, well, that's very interesting also, because up until the Kennedy brothers take office, J. Edgar Hoover had basically been the czar of the whole, not just the FBI, but basically ran the Attorney General, okay, because he could control information going to the Attorney General's office.
Yeah.
You know, and if the Attorney General would tell him something to do, you know, if Hoover wanted to do it, he'd do it. If he didn't want to do it, he wouldn't do it, because nobody's going to push him around. Well, see, Bobby was the first guy who really said, you are going to do this, Mr. Hoover. Okay, we are going to integrate in the South. We are going to support civil rights workers in the South.
That's right.
Okay, et cetera. Okay, and Hoover, of course, didn't want to do it, you know. And in fact, Hoover was planning secret operations against King.
Right.
Okay, he actually sent a dossier.
He was bugging and with
right, and he sent a dossier out, okay, smearing King. And Bobby heard about it, and he actually walked right into his office and said, I want every copy of that dossier that you distributed on King back in your office by tomorrow. Okay? And Hoover said, it's already out. It's already out. He goes, I want you to get it back. Okay, we're not going to be doing that kind of stuff. Okay? Yeah. So that's the kind of Attorney General he was. Yeah.
Well, now, and in pushing the civil rights issues, he's boiling up the South.
Right.
He's pushing J.
Oh, these guys despise him. These people in the South despised him. You know, like Bull Connor.
So he should have never even gone to South Carolina.
Wallace, yeah.
I mean,
Wallace and those guys, they just hated him. Yeah, because
RFK even more than JFK.
Oh yeah, because RFK was the guy who was actually doing it. Okay.
And less charm.
Yeah, and so again, another example is the famous March on Washington. Okay, you know, where King gives the great "I Have a Dream" speech. No white politician in Washington supported that march until July 7th, I think is a date. JFK comes out at a press conference and says, we will be supporting the SCLC's March on Washington. And Bobby's sitting there thunderstruck, because he didn't even tell him he was going to say it. And he calls him into his office after. He goes, look, you're in charge of this thing. He goes, what do you mean I'm in charge? He goes, look, we cannot let this thing blow up on our faces. Okay? If we're going to back this thing, it's got to go off perfectly. Our enemies will use it to destroy us. Okay? So you're going to run this thing from my office. Okay? And nothing bad is going to happen. Okay, you understand? And so Bobby basically ran that whole March on Washington thing in 1963.
Just for the benefit of the audience, what
the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, King's organization.
That's King's
right.
Nonviolent civil rights movement, the Southern Christian
Leadership Conference. Right.
That's right. So okay, well these guys have been on the ball. They've been keeping busy. And JFK still had time for a little hanky-panky on the side, too.
and by the way, Hoover, of course, tried to get as much dirt as he could on RFK.
But it was just on JFK.
He would send agents out to track Bobby all night, you know, and they would end up filing these reports. This guy's an altar boy. He goes to a party, sits by himself, nurses one drink all night, you know, talks to maybe one girl all night, you know, goes home by himself, and day after day he's getting these kinds of reports. You know, so he
but it wouldn't have been beyond Hoover's ethics to try to entrap him with somebody.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, of course.
So, but the fact that he could operate without restraint indicates that they never effectively entrapped him, because they didn't have anything to blackmail him.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're getting closer now. So, unfortunately, we have the demise of JFK. Somewhere in Daley Plaza in Dallas. It was Dallas, Texas.
Yeah, November 1963. JFK is assassinated. Robert Kennedy's thunderstruck by this thing.
I got it. You know, there's what do you call it, like an urban legend. Everybody knows where they were when they
Right.
first heard about that. I do. Do you know? Are you?
Yeah, I was in grade school, and it came on the intercom, okay, and they let us off of school early that day.
And it was a psychic shock in the
right,
group.
right. Boy, I'll say, and then that whole weekend, of course, you're buried in front of the TV, etc. Nobody can really understand what's going on.
Yeah, and it's like psychic drama. It was a body blow, like a big.
Yeah.
If you've ever fallen on your back and you lose your wind,
It was like a
big
collective
blow.
traumatic experience.
That's right.
I mean, that weekend.
Not a phony one either. I mean, it was a collective,
Oh, yeah.
unanticipated, traumatic experience. It wasn't a psychological operation or anything.
Mm-hmm.
It was like boom.
So Bobby.
So what's Bobby's reaction after this?
Okay, Bobby is first. He's absolutely shocked. Okay, he then tries to understand what has happened. Now, there's various reports about what Bobby really thought. Okay, was going on. Okay, but I think if you read as much as I have, and you talk to as many people as I had, and I actually talked to somebody who was inside Bobby's camp at the time. Okay, privately, Bobby did not swallow what the Warren Commission, was bringing up. Okay, but of course he was smart enough to understand that he really couldn't go public with his doubts, or the media would destroy him.
Right.
Okay, and so what he decided to do then was stick around. Okay, but after the Kennedy assassination, Bobby's not the same person. Okay, he's relegated because supposedly Hoover said when JFK died, well, Robert Kennedy is just another attorney now. I don't have to listen to him anymore. And he pulled out RFK's private line, into his office. All right. And Johnson, of course, did not like RFK at all, because RFK did not want Johnson on the ticket. Okay, in 1960. All right. So Bobby is kind of relegated to the background once Johnson
Well, wait a
takes
minute,
over.
but Johnson went along with the civil rights movement. With,
Yeah, he did.
With
But
the
he
Voting Rights Act.
But he
et
called
cetera.
King into his office. He
Yeah.
called King into his office and said, I'm going to be taking this thing over now. A Southerner is now going to be in charge of getting the Civil Rights Act through. Okay, he consciously took it away from the Kennedys.
So to save face, or get in front of the story,
Right.
as opposed to having the northern liberals come down
Right.
and stuff it down your throat.
the
Now this
best-
guy from Texas takes it over. He
Right.
says, we'll do it.
The best example of that is the day that the Civil Rights Act law was passed in 1964, and there's films of this. Okay, Bobby was there. Johnson gave Bobby the pens to pass out to all the signees. If you didn't get the message by then, okay, you sure got it that day. Okay, so Bobby resigns, in 1964. Okay, does a lot of soul searching, goes into an agonizing kind of retrospection. All right, and then he decides to run for the Senate from New York. Okay, and he wins in a rather close race. Okay, and then of course comes. There's two things that happened to Bobby in the Senate. Number one, his meeting with Cesar Chavez, and number two, he decides to come out against the Vietnam War. Okay, so he becomes a real enemy, of LBJ when he starts making these speeches against the Vietnam War. And then, of course, there's his meeting with Cesar Chavez in Delano.
So when does he come out against the war? 65? 66?
Well, I think Bobby comes out publicly against the war in 66. Okay, and then really kind of violently. By the time 68 comes around, he's really making some really tough speeches. Okay, and there's also in 1966 he goes to South Africa. He becomes I think the first American white politician who goes to South Africa and actually speaks out against apartheid in Johannesburg. Amazing thing to do. Nobody talks about that either. Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. So he evolves. He evolves, from this real tough, ruthless attorney general into a much more widened and broadened and compassionate and aware kind of politician.
More of a statesman,
Right.
representing different
Yes.
aspects of society,
Yeah.
rather than just, basically I'm a cop and a prosecutor.
Right, exactly. By the time he becomes senator. And one of the key events you want to look at this, and everybody who knew him at this time said this, at the 1964 convention, when Johnson's being renominated, for president, Bobby, it's an absolutely electric moment, comes to the podium. Before he can say one single solitary word, the whole convention erupts, okay? And there's a standing ovation, which I think goes on for 11 minutes, okay? And everybody who knew him realized at that moment that he realized that that really wasn't for him.
Right, that
Okay.
was for JFK.
They now expected him to take up
To take the banner.
where his brother had died, okay? And that's what really began to turn him around. And he decided that he couldn't just be an attorney or a prosecutor anymore. He now had to become a politician and a statesman.
Okay, we
Yeah.
have a little time to get to the climax of this, or like the first the end of
First
Act
act.
1, the first act. But I just have to ask you if you can answer it. I mean, if I was in a position, I mean, he knows there's something going on. His brother was assassinated. He can't go forward without knowing with certainty who the opposition is, what really happened. Isn't that? I mean, do you?
Oh
you
yeah,
understand what I'm
I think
saying?
that by 1968,
You think he
when he's
knew
running,
what it was? He
yeah,
knew
I think he did realize it by then.
who it was.
Yeah, I do
You
think by
he
then
had
he did.
concluded who his enemies were.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's a senator. He starts running 66, 67.
He announces, yeah, well, after he's in the Senate, okay, there's, Johnson becomes more and more unpopular because of the war.
Yeah.
And Johnson begins to fall apart. His whole administration begins to fall apart. Eugene McCarthy announces that he's going to run in the primaries against Johnson, all right? And then in the first primary in New Hampshire, he actually does pretty well. Johnson wins the primary, but I think McCarthy only lost by about 7 or 8 points. So I think the day after, or 2 days after, Bobby decides that he's going to announce, okay? So he announces, he puts together his campaign, all right? And he does very well, okay, until Oregon, 1 week before California. In Oregon, he becomes the first candidate to lose an election, all right?
So a primary.
Yeah. And so then comes into California, and he has to win California now because he lost in Oregon. To wipe out McCarthy, he has to win California. All right, so he and Cesar Chavez have a little meeting, okay? And Cesar Chavez tells him, Bobby, if you want to beat McCarthy, you've got to run in the ghettos and the barrios because he's going to run neck and neck with you on the west side in Los Angeles. With the liberals, it's going to be a very close race, all right? And so Bobby goes with his advisors and say, well, what do you think? He goes, Bobby, that's stupid. He goes, why? Because those people don't vote.
Right.
Okay, I mean, you're going to go there for what? He goes, well, I don't care. I'm going to go with Caesar. Okay? And so you get all those great, if you've seen them, the movies and the pictures of him in the back of the cars and, you know, and these people of color grabbing at him. You know,
Populist.
yeah, like he's a rock star. Okay, you know, grabbing him and he's shaking hands, etc. You know, and so the morning of the election, there's a great story by Jack Newfield, who was in the Kennedy campaign. And he says, you know, I had sided with the advisors. I thought this was stupid. So that morning I went out to East LA and to South Central at 5 o'clock in the morning. He goes, I couldn't believe it. People were lined up 6 blocks down the street to vote before dawn. Okay? Because there had never been anything like it in Los Angeles history. He goes, that is the only election in Los Angeles history where the turnout in the ghettos and the barrios was higher than the turnout on the west side. Okay? And so that's what propelled RFK to victory, okay, in the primary. And that basically, for all intents and purposes, that knocked out McCarthy.
Right. So now
Okay.
he's got that. So this is
Yeah.
so now when do we get to the ambassador?
So now, that evening,
That same evening.
okay, that evening, Bobby is in the 5th floor of the Ambassador Hotel, and the results are coming in, okay, and I think about 9 or 9:30, CBS predicts that he's going to be the winner, you know, of the California primary, okay? So he comes downstairs with his entourage, all right, and he goes into the embassy ballroom, you know, at the Ambassador Hotel, and he makes the speech. Okay, and he basically, sarcastically, he says, I'd like to thank Sam Yorty for all his support, because that was a really conservative Democrat. Mayor of Los Angeles despised Bobby, all right? And he goes, and on to Chicago, and let's win there. So he then goes down the corridor, which connects the Ambassador Ballroom with the Colonial Room, which he's going to address the press. But you have to go through the kitchen pantry, okay, to get to the Colonial Room. So he goes down the corridor, he goes through these swinging doors, and he's shaking hands with some of the people in the pantry. I think the last guy he shook hands with was a Hispanic guy named Juan Romero. Okay, he turns, and then this Palestinian immigrant jumps out in front of him, okay, with the revolver and starts firing, okay? All right, and to this day, nobody knows how many shots were fired in the ambassador. Carl Euchre, who's the German immigrant, who's the maitre d' at the hotel, grabs this guy, whose name is Sirhan, slams his hand into a steam table. Rosie Greer and Rayford Johnson, you know, Rosie Greer's a football player, Rayford Johnson's the Olympic athlete, grab him, okay? RFK falls to the ground, okay, has 4 shots in him, and there's 5 other bystanders who are hit.